The first thing Martha Collins notices when she wakes is the smell, an acrid, choking scent that doesn't belong in her small log cabin on the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, Montana. The second thing she notices is the orange glow dancing against her bedroom wall, too bright and too warm for the dying embers that should be left in her fireplace. "Fire," she whispers, the word barely audible in the frigid December air, then louder, with the terror of understanding flooding through her. "Fire!" Martha bolts upright, her bare feet hitting the icy wooden floor as flames begin licking through. The cracks around her bedroom door. The faulty chimney she's been unable to afford to repair has finally claimed its due, and the fire is spreading with terrifying speed through the dry timber of their modest home. "Lucy! Ben!" She rushes to her children's small room, finding 9-year-old Lucy already awake and shaking 6-year-old Ben by the shoulders. "Mama, I smell smoke," Lucy says with the matter-of-fact calmness that children sometimes show in crisis, though her eyes are wide with fear. "We have to go outside, right now," Martha says, scooping Ben into her arms while Lucy grabs their coats. From the pegs by the door. The boy is still half asleep, confused by the sudden urgency and the strange orange light filling their home. They stumble into the brutal Montana night, where the temperature hovers near 20 below zero and snow lies 3 feet deep across the ground. Behind them, their little house, the home Martha's husband Thomas had built with his own hands before the mining accident took his life, erupts into a pillar of flame that lights up the surrounding pine forest like a torch. Martha pulls her. Children close against her thin nightgown, all 3 of them shivering violently as they watch 6 years of memories and everything they own in the world disappear into the hungry flames. The fire burns with such intensity that the heat can be felt even 50 yards away, melting the snow in a wide circle around the structure. "Mama, where will we sleep?" Ben asks in a small voice, finally understanding that their home is truly gone. Before Martha can answer, she hears the sound of horses and voices approaching through the snow. The glow of the fire has been visible for miles in the clear winter air, and help is arriving from Cedar Ridge. Sheriff Tom Bradley is the first to reach them, followed by several townspeople including Dr. Samuel Weber, general store owner Pete Morrison, and half a dozen other men who've ridden out to see if anyone needed rescuing from the blaze. "Martha! Thank God you and the children got out safe," Sheriff Bradley says, dismounting quickly and wrapping his heavy coat around her shoulders. "Anyone hurt?" "We're fine," Martha manages through chattering teeth, though fine is a relative term when you're standing barefoot in Montana snow, watching your entire life burn down. Dr. Weber examines the children quickly for smoke inhalation, while the other men form a bucket brigade to prevent the fire from spreading to the surrounding trees. But the house itself is beyond saving. The flames have consumed the roof entirely, and the walls are beginning to collapse inward with sounds like gunshots. "Come on," Sheriff Bradley says gently. "Let's get you folks somewhere warm." Mrs. Patterson's boarding house has room, at least for tonight. As they load into the sheriff's wagon, Martha takes one last look at the inferno that was her home. In the dancing flames, she can almost see Thomas's ghost, his strong hands building the kitchen table where they'd shared so many meals, his gentle voice reading bedtime stories to the children in the room that's now nothing but charcoal and ash. The next morning brings the harsh reality of her situation into crystal-clear focus. Martha sits in the boarding house parlor with her children, still wearing the nightclothes that are now their only possessions, as the town's unofficial council of elders gathers to discuss what can be done. "We've taken up a collection," announces Reverend William Hayes, producing a small leather pouch that jingles with coins. "It's not much, but folks have given what they can spare." Martha counts the money with growing despair. $11.43, barely enough to buy winter clothes for the children, let alone begin rebuilding a home. The other townspeople shift uncomfortably, their own pinched faces telling the story of a community where everyone is struggling to survive the harsh frontier winter. There's also the question of the land, Sheriff Bradley says reluctantly. Without a house on it, and with the back taxes Thomas owed. He doesn't need to finish the sentence. Martha knows exactly what he means. The territorial government requires improvements on homestead claims, and without a dwelling, her legal right to the land becomes questionable. As if summoned by the discussion of financial distress, Harrison Blackwood makes his entrance. The town's banker and wealthiest resident, Blackwood, is a man in his 50s, with perfectly groomed whiskers, expensive clothes, and the calculating eyes of someone who sees opportunity in every tragedy. "Mrs. Collins," he says with oily sympathy, "I was terribly sorry to hear about your misfortune. Such a tragedy, especially with winter setting in." Martha looks up at him warily. She's had dealings with Blackwood before, always unpleasant, always leaving her feeling like she'd been cheated, even when the transactions were technically legal. "However," Blackwood continues, "I may be able to help with your immediate difficulties. I'm prepared to make an offer on your land. A generous offer, considering the circumstances." He produces a legal document from his coat pocket. $500 for the entire homestead, cash money available immediately, enough to get you and the children to California, where the climate is more forgiving. Martha stares at the paper with growing horror. $500 for land that Thomas had valued at $1,500, and that was before he'd cleared the timber and improved the soil. It's highway robbery disguised as charity. "Mr. Blackwood," she says carefully, "that land is worth 3 times what you're offering." Blackwood's smile doesn't reach his eyes. Perhaps it was, Mrs. Collins, when it had a house on it, when there wasn't a question about the legal standing of the claim, when you had the resources to work it and pay the taxes. But circumstances have changed, haven't they? The other townspeople look away uncomfortably. Everyone knows what Blackwood is doing, but everyone also knows that crossing the town's only banker is a luxury few can afford. "I'll need time to think about it," Martha says. "Of course," Blackwood replies smoothly, "but don't take too long. Winter doesn't wait for anyone, and I'd hate to see you and the children suffer unnecessarily." The threat is politely phrased but unmistakable. Accept his exploitative offer, or face winter on the frontier with 2 small children and no resources. That evening, as Martha sits by the boarding house window watching snow fall in the growing darkness, Lucy approaches quietly and slips her small hand into her mother's. "Mama, are we going to be all right?" Martha forces a smile she doesn't feel. "Of course we are, sweetheart. We're Collinses. We don't give up easy." But as she stares out at the swirling snow and thinks about Blackwood's ultimatum, Martha feels the crushing weight of impossible choices pressing down on her shoulders. In the distance, she can see the blackened ruins of her home, a dark scar against the white landscape that reminds her of everything she's lost and everything she still stands to lose. The chapter ends with Martha putting her children to bed in the boarding house's small spare room, whispering prayers she's not sure anyone is listening to, while outside the Montana wind howls like a living thing, hungry for whatever warmth and hope still remains in Cedar Ridge. The blizzard arrives the next evening with a fury that seems personal, as if the Montana winter has decided to test every soul in Cedar Ridge to their breaking point. Wind screams through the gaps in buildings, and snow falls so thick that a man can't see his own hand stretched out in front of his face. Martha sits in the boarding house parlor with her children, mending the one dress Lucy owns, while Ben plays with wooden blocks borrowed from Mrs. Patterson's collection of toys left behind by previous guests. The warmth of the fire can't quite chase away the chill that has settled into Martha's bones. not just from the cold, but from the certainty that tomorrow will bring Blackwood's deadline and a choice that isn't really a choice at all. "Mama," Lucy says quietly, looking up from the book she's been reading by lamplight, "what if we don't sell to Mr. Blackwood? What if we stay and build a new house?" Martha's heart breaks a little at her daughter's innocent optimism. "Sweetheart, building a house costs money we don't have, and time we don't have with winter already here. But Papa built our house. He did it by himself. Papa had tools and lumber and—" Martha's voice trails off. Thomas had indeed built their home with his own hands, but it had taken him an entire summer, working every evening after his shifts in the mine. And he'd had resources, lumber from trees he'd cut himself, nails and hardware bought with steady wages, and most importantly, time to do the work properly. A thunderous knocking at the boarding house door interrupts her melancholy thoughts. The sound is urgent, desperate, the kind of pounding that speaks of someone fighting for their life against the storm. Mrs. Patterson, a practical woman in her 60s who's run the boarding house for 20 years, hurries to answer. When she opens the door, snow and wind explode into the warm interior, along with a figure so covered in ice and snow that he's barely recognizable as human. "Please," the stranger gasps, stumbling into the parlor. "Just need shelter from the storm." Mrs. Patterson quickly closes the door against the howling wind, while Martha and the other guests stare at the newcomer. He's a tall man, probably in his 40s, with the kind of weathered face that speaks of years spent outdoors. His clothes are simple, worn leather coat, sturdy boots, and a hat that's seen better days. But there's something about his bearing that suggests quiet strength. Of course," Mrs. Patterson says, helping him out of his ice-crusted coat. "Anyone caught in this storm is welcome. Can't turn a soul out into weather like this." The stranger nods gratefully, his keen eyes taking in the assembled group. Martha and her children, 2 traveling salesmen, and old Jake the prospector, who winters in town when the mines shut down. When his gaze rests on Martha, she sees something flicker across his face. Recognition, perhaps, or calculation. "Name's Mackenzie," he says simply. "James Mackenzie. Most folks just call me Silent." "Silent?" Ben pipes up with the fearless curiosity of a 6-year-old. "Why do they call you Silent?" Mackenzie's weathered face creases into a gentle smile. "Well, young man, I suppose it's because I tend to listen more than I talk. You learn more that way." As Mackenzie settles into a chair by the fire, warming his hands and accepting a cup of hot coffee from Mrs. Patterson, Martha finds herself studying him. There's something about the man that doesn't quite fit. His clothes are simple, but they're well made. His hands are calloused from work, but his speech suggests education. Most telling of all, when he reached for his wallet to pay Mrs. Patterson for the room, Martha caught a glimpse of more money than any ordinary drifter would carry. "Terrible storm," Mackenzie says conversationally. "Caught me between towns. Lucky to find this place." "Where you headed?" asked Jake the prospector. "West eventually, but no hurry. Sometimes a man needs to slow down. See what's really important." Mrs. Patterson, ever the hostess, begins making introductions. When she reaches Martha and the children, Mackenzie's attention sharpens perceptibly. "Mrs. Collins and her children," Mrs. Patterson explains. "They've had some terrible luck, lost their home to a fire just 2 nights ago." "I'm sorry to hear that," Mackenzie says, and there's genuine sympathy in his voice. "That's a hard thing, especially with winter coming on." "We're managing," Martha says quietly, instinctively wary of discussing her troubles with a stranger. But Lucy, with the openness of childhood, has no such reservations. "Our whole house burned down, everything we had, and now Mr. Blackwood wants to buy our land for hardly any money, and Mama doesn't know what to do." "Lucy," Martha warns gently, but Mackenzie holds up a hand. It's all right. Children see things clearly sometimes. He turns to Martha with eyes that seem older than his years. This Blackwood, he's pressuring you to sell? Martha nods reluctantly. He says it's a generous offer considering the circumstances, but it's not generous at all, Mackenzie finishes. I've met men like Blackwood in every town from here to California. They make their money from other people's misfortune. The room falls quiet except for the howling of the wind outside. The two traveling salesmen shift uncomfortably. They have business dealings with Blackwood and don't want to be seen agreeing with criticism of the town's most powerful man. Mackenzie seems to sense the tension. Well, he says mildly, I suppose. Every community has its challenges. The question is what decent folks choose to do about them. He stands and stretches, moving with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin. Mrs. Patterson, would it be possible to get some supper? And perhaps someone could direct me to where I might buy some supplies in the morning. I may be staying in the area longer than I originally planned. As the conversation turns to mundane matters of meals and supplies, Martha finds herself watching Mackenzie with growing curiosity. There's something about the man that doesn't add up. The way he carries himself, the quality of his boots despite their worn appearance, and most of all, the way he seemed genuinely angered by her situation with Blackwood. Later that evening, as Martha tucks her children into the small bed they're sharing in the boarding house's spare room, Ben whispers sleepily, Mama, I like Mr. Silent. He has kind eyes. Lucy, always more perceptive than her years would suggest, adds thoughtfully, he didn't seem surprised when Mrs. Patterson told him about our house, like he already knew. Martha kisses both children goodnight and returns to the parlor, where she finds Mackenzie sitting alone by the dying fire, staring into the flames with the expression of a man working through a complex problem. Mr. Mackenzie, she says quietly, I hope Lucy didn't make you uncomfortable with her chatter about our troubles. He looks up with that gentle smile. Not at all, Mrs. Collins. I have children of my own, back east. I know how they are. You're married then? A shadow crosses his face. Was. My wife passed 3 years ago. The children are grown now, making their own way in the world. They sit in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the storm rage outside. Finally, Mackenzie speaks again. Mrs. Collins, can I ask you something? What would you do if you had the resources to rebuild? If money wasn't the issue? Martha looks at him in surprise. I suppose I'd stay. This is home. Thomas is buried here and the children have friends, but that's not really possible, is it? Mackenzie doesn't answer directly. Instead, he asks, how long has Blackwood given you to decide? Tomorrow. He wants an answer tomorrow. Mackenzie nods slowly, as if confirming something he already suspected. Well then, Mrs. Collins, I suppose tomorrow will be an interesting day. The chapter ends with Martha retiring to her room, leaving Mackenzie alone by the fire. As the storm continues to rage outside, he sits quietly in the darkness, his mind clearly working on plans that he's not yet ready to share. In his weathered hands, he turns over a small object that glints in the firelight, a gold coin bearing an inscription too small to read, but obviously precious to the man who carries it. Martha wakes before dawn to an unusual sound, the ring of hammers and the scrape of saws cutting through the crisp morning air. The blizzard has passed, leaving Cedar Ridge buried under 2 feet of fresh snow, but the winter sky is clear and bright for the first time in days. Confused, she slips from her bed and moves to the frosted window. What she sees defies all logic and explanation. Where the charred ruins of her house stood just yesterday, a small army of men is already at work. In the pale pre-dawn light, she can make out at least 20 figures moving with purposeful efficiency. Some laying foundation stones, others framing walls, still others unloading lumber from wagons that stretch in a line down the snow-covered road. "Lucy, Ben, wake up," she whispers urgently. "You need to see this." Her children join her at the window, their eyes growing wide with amazement. Ben presses his face against the cold glass and breathes out in wonder. "Mama, who are all those people?" Before Martha can answer, because she has no answer, Mrs. Patterson appears in the doorway wearing her heavy coat and boots. "Mrs. Collins, you'd better come downstairs. There's someone here to see you." In the boarding house parlor, Martha finds James Mackenzie waiting with a steaming cup of coffee and an expression of quiet satisfaction. In the daylight, she notices details about him that were hidden in the firelight: the quality of his pocket watch, the fine leather of his boots, and most tellingly, the ease with which he meets her eyes. "Mr. Mackenzie," she says carefully, "do you know what's happening at my land?" "I do," he replies simply. "I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of arranging some help." Martha stares at him. "Help? There must be 20 men out there. How did you—" Mackenzie sets down his coffee and walks to the window, gesturing for her to join him. "Mrs. Collins, let me tell you what I've learned about Cedar Ridge in the short time I've been here. You have good people in this town, people who wanted to help you but didn't have the means. All they needed was someone to organize the effort and provide the resources." He points to different groups of workers. "That's Pete Morrison from the general store, working alongside Doc Weber and Reverend Hayes. Those 3 men by the foundation are ranchers from outside town, came in before dawn when word spread that there was work to be done. And see that wagon train? That's lumber from 3 different mills, all donated or provided at cost." Martha feels tears starting to form. "But who's paying for all this? The lumber alone must cost—" "Let's just say it's been taken care of," Mackenzie replies gently. "Sometimes a community needs a catalyst, someone who can turn good intentions into practical action." As they watch, more men arrive, some on horseback, others driving wagons loaded with supplies. Martha recognizes faces from town, but there are also strangers, men who've clearly traveled from neighboring settlements to be part of this effort. "I don't understand," Martha whispers. "Why would strangers care about helping us?" Mackenzie's expression grows thoughtful. "Mrs. Collins, I've traveled a lot of miles in my life, met a lot of people. I've learned that most folks are fundamentally decent. They want to help when they see real need. The problem is usually logistics, not lack of compassion." Through the window, they can see Sheriff Bradley directing the placement of windows while Jake the prospector, despite his age, works alongside younger men to raise the roof beams. Even some of the women from town have arrived, setting up a cooking station to feed the workers. "There's more," Mackenzie continues. "I had a conversation with Harrison Blackwood this morning." Martha's stomach clenches. What kind of conversation? A kind where a man learns that his business practices have attracted the attention of people with more resources than he has. Mackenzie's voice remains mild, but there's steel underneath. "It seems Mr. Blackwood has decided that his previous offer was inadequate. He's withdrawn it entirely." "Withdrawn it?" "He's decided that pressing a widow for her land isn't the kind of reputation he wants for his bank, especially not when there are people watching who might decide to take their business elsewhere." Martha feels a surge of relief, so strong it makes her knees weak, but questions still crowd her mind. "Mr. Mackenzie, who are you? Really?" Before he can answer, Lucy and Ben come thundering down the stairs, already dressed and eager to see the construction up close. "Can we go watch, Mama?" Ben pleads. "I want to see them build our new house." Mackenzie smiles at the children's excitement. "I think that would be a fine idea. After all, it's going to be your home. You should see how it's being made." As they walk through the snow toward the construction site, Martha is amazed by the level of organization and efficiency. This isn't a haphazard barn raising. This is a carefully planned construction project with skilled craftsmen, quality materials, and enough workers to complete the job in record time. Reverend Hayes approaches them, his face glowing with exertion and satisfaction. Martha, this is the most beautiful thing I've seen in 20 years of ministry. The way this community has come together, it's truly a miracle. But how did word spread so fast? Martha asks. The Reverend glances at Mackenzie with obvious respect. Mr. Mackenzie here rode out before dawn yesterday, in the middle of that blizzard, to spread word to the neighboring settlements, told them about your situation, and asked if they could spare any help. By morning, we had commitments for lumber, labor, and supplies from 6 different communities. Martha turns to stare at Mackenzie. You rode out in that storm. You could have been killed. He shrugs modestly. I've ridden in worse weather. Besides, sometimes urgent needs require urgent action. As the day progresses, Martha watches in amazement as her new home takes shape with impossible speed. The foundation is laid and the frame assembled by noon. By afternoon, walls are going up and the roof is being shingled. The house is modest but well built, with solid construction and thoughtful details. A covered porch, a brick chimney that won't present the fire hazard that claimed their first home, and windows positioned to catch the maximum amount of winter sunlight. Dr. Weber approaches Martha as she watches the workers. Mrs. Collins, I've seen a lot of community efforts in my time, but nothing like this. Usually these things take weeks to organize. The fact that Mr. Mackenzie managed to coordinate all this in a single day, well, it speaks to either exceptional organizational skills or exceptional resources, possibly both. As evening approaches and the work continues by lantern light, Martha finally corners Mackenzie near the supply wagons. Mr. Mackenzie, she says, firmly, I need to know who you really are. This level of coordination, the resources you've somehow made available, the way you handled Blackwood. This isn't something an ordinary drifter could accomplish. Mackenzie looks at her for a long moment, then sighs. You're right, of course. My name is James Mackenzie, but Silent isn't just a nickname. It's what I prefer when I travel. You see, Mrs. Collins, I'm what you might call a man of means. I made my fortune in lumber and railroads back east, but I lost my family along the way, worked so hard building my business that I forgot to pay attention to what really mattered. He gestures toward the house, where workers are still laboring, by lamplight, to complete the project. When my wife died, I realized that all the money in the world couldn't bring back the time I'd wasted. So I decided to spend my remaining years differently, traveling, finding people who need help, and using my resources to make a difference. Martha feels the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. You've been doing this for a while, haven't you? Helping people anonymously? Mackenzie nods. 3 years now. I've helped rebuild churches destroyed by tornadoes, provided medical care for mining towns, established schools in communities that couldn't afford them. I prefer to work quietly. Less attention means more gets accomplished. But why us? Why our family? Mackenzie's expression grows gentle. Because yesterday, when I heard that little girl worrying about where her family would sleep, I saw my own children's faces. Because I recognized a good woman trying to do right by her family against impossible odds. And because... He pauses, looking toward the nearly completed house, because sometimes the universe puts you exactly where you need to be to do some good. The chapter ends with Martha standing beside this mysterious benefactor watching her. Neighbors and strangers work together to rebuild not just her house, but her faith in human kindness. In the golden light of the lanterns, with the sound of hammers ringing through the crisp night air, she realizes that miracles don't always require supernatural intervention. Sometimes they just require one person with the resources and the heart to turn compassion into action. By the time the sun rises on the second day, Martha Collins stands in the doorway of her new home, a house more solid and beautiful than the one she lost. The walls are straight, the roof is secure, and the windows sparkle in the morning light. Most remarkably of all, it's been built with love as much as lumber, each board placed by hands motivated not by profit, but by genuine care for her family's welfare. James Mackenzie stands beside her, surveying the completed work with quiet satisfaction. Behind them, Lucy and Ben explore their new rooms with the wonder of children who have witnessed magic made manifest through human kindness. "It's perfect," Martha whispers, running her hand along the smooth doorframe. "I still can't believe it's real." The past 24 hours have transformed more than just her housing situation. Word of the miraculous rebuilding has spread throughout the territory, bringing visitors from towns as far as 50 miles away who want to see for themselves the community that came together to help a widow and her children. Among the visitors is Territorial Governor Samuel Crawford, who arrived that morning with his entourage to witness what he calls the finest example of frontier cooperation he's seen in his time in office. "Mrs. Collins," Governor Crawford says warmly, shaking her hand on the front porch of her new home, "your story has reached the territorial capital. The way this community rallied to help you speaks well of Montana values." But Martha's attention is focused on Mackenzie, who has been growing increasingly uncomfortable with the attention and accolades. She's noticed him declining interviews with the newspaper reporters who've arrived, deflecting credit to the community volunteers, and making quiet preparations to continue his journey. "Mr. Mackenzie," she says during a quiet moment when they're alone, "you're planning to leave, aren't you?" He nods regretfully. "My work here is done, and publicity isn't good for what I do. The more attention these efforts get, the harder it becomes to help people quietly." Martha feels a pang of loss at the thought of his departure, but she understands. This man's calling requires anonymity, and the celebration of his good deed is already making his future work more difficult. "Before you go," she says, "there's something I need to say. We can't repay you financially, but I want you to know that your kindness will ripple forward in ways you might not expect." She calls Lucy and Ben to join them on the porch. Both children approach Mackenzie with the mixture of shyness and affection that he's inspired during his brief time in their lives. "Mr. Silent," Lucy says solemnly, "Mama says you're leaving, but we want you to know that we'll never forget what you did for us." Ben, ever practical despite his young age, adds, "And when I grow up, I'm going to help people too, just like you did." Mackenzie kneels down to the children's level, his weathered face soft with emotion. "You know what, Ben? I think you're going to be exactly the kind of man this world needs more of." He reaches into his coat and produces two small gifts. For Lucy, a beautiful leather-bound journal with her name embossed on the cover, and for Ben, a small set of real carpenter's tools sized for his hands. "Lucy, I want you to write down the story of what happened here. Someday, when you're grown, you might meet someone who needs to hear about how a community can come together to help those in need." He turns to Ben. "And these tools are for you to practice with. Your papa was a builder, and I have a feeling you might be one too. But remember, the most important building you'll ever do isn't houses or barns, it's building up other people when they need it most." As Mackenzie prepares to depart, an unexpected visitor arrives. Harrison Blackwood approaches the house on foot, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something closer to humility. "Mrs. Collins," Blackwood says, removing his hat, "I came to apologize. My behavior toward you was inappropriate. Trying to take advantage of your misfortune was wrong, and I'm ashamed of myself." Martha studies the banker's face, looking for signs of insincerity, but his regret appears genuine. Furthermore, Blackwood continues, I've brought you something. He produces a legal document from his coat. This is the deed to your land, with all back taxes paid and a clear title. Consider it my way of making amends. Mackenzie, who has been watching this interaction with interest, nods approvingly. Mr. Blackwood, that's a generous gesture. It takes character to admit when you've been wrong. After Blackwood leaves, Martha turns to Mackenzie with new understanding. You didn't just organize the rebuilding and provide the materials, you also made sure he understood the consequences of his actions. Mackenzie's smile is enigmatic. Let's just say Mr. Blackwood and I had a very educational conversation about the importance of treating neighbors with respect. As the afternoon progresses, Mackenzie loads his few possessions into his saddlebags and prepares for departure. The entire town has gathered to see him off, though few know his true identity or the full extent of his contribution to the miracle. They've witnessed. Sheriff Bradley shakes his hand warmly. Mr. Mackenzie, I don't know who you really are, but you've done something special here. This community will be talking about these past few days for generations. Dr. Weber adds, the way you organized all this, it's given us a model for how we can help each other in the future. You've made us better neighbors, but it's Reverend Hayes who perhaps understands most clearly what has transpired. Mr. Mackenzie, I've been preaching about miracles for 20 years, but I've never seen one quite like this. You've shown us that the greatest miracles aren't supernatural. They're what happens when human compassion is organized and empowered. As Mackenzie mounts his horse and prepares to ride out of Cedar Ridge, Martha approaches him one final time. James, she says, using his first name for the first time, I know you prefer to work anonymously, but I want you to know that your kindness has done more than rebuild our house. You've restored our faith in people, in community, in the possibility that good things can happen even in the darkest times. Mackenzie touches the brim of his hat in farewell. Martha, you and your children have given me something precious too, the reminder that family and community are the only things that truly matter. Take care of each other. As he rides away into the Montana sunset, the people of Cedar Ridge stand, together watching until he disappears over the horizon. Behind them stands the house that will forever be known as the Miracle House. A testament to what can be accomplished when one person with resources and countless people with good hearts work together. 6 months later, Martha receives a package with no return address. Inside, she finds a photograph of a small school building with a brass plaque that reads, The Martha Collins Elementary School, and a note in Mackenzie's careful handwriting, built by the people of Harmony, Colorado, for children who needed a place to learn. Your story inspired theirs. The circle continues. That evening, Martha sits on her front porch with Lucy and Ben, watching the Montana sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Her daughter is writing in the journal Mackenzie gave her, documenting not just their family's story, but the ongoing acts of kindness she witnesses in their transformed community. Ben works beside her with his small tools, building a birdhouse that he plans to give to Mrs. Patterson as a thank you for her kindness during their darkest days. Mama, Lucy says, looking up from her writing, do you think Mr. Silent is helping someone else right now? Martha smiles, thinking of the mysterious benefactor who changed their lives in the space of 2 days. I'm sure he is, sweetheart. And someday when you're grown up, maybe you'll help someone too. I will, Lucy says with the certainty that only children possess. I'll help lots of people, just like he showed us. The story ends with Martha Collins understanding that James Mackenzie's greatest gift wasn't the house he helped build, but the example he set, showing an entire community that extraordinary kindness is possible when ordinary people choose to act with extraordinary generosity. In the distance, a train whistle echoes across the Montana prairie, carrying the promise that Somewhere another stranger in need of help is about to discover that miracles still happen in the American West, one act of compassion at a time.